talk about Jupiter in Gemini. Before we do that, let's talk about Jupiter on its own and talk about Gemini on its own so that we are equipped to have an intelligent discussion about how to interpret Jupiter in Gemini. If you would like to get such interpretations for Jupiter in Gemini or whatever you happen to have in your chart, then you can go to my website, victicare.com, to get directly to the guided tour of your birth chart report. And that will give you every planet in your chart, in whatever sign it's in, that will be interpreted, also whatever house it's in, whatever nakshatra, etc. All right, now let's get on with this and talk about Jupiter. The base or the root of what Jupiter symbolizes is positivity. So what do we mean by positivity? The first most obvious thing we mean is a plus sign. Positivity is additive, it's addition, it's increase. And that is at very close to the root of what Jupiter signifies, is the increase of things, the growth of things, the prosperity or the success. So this means that Jupiter is also very, very important for things that have to do with creation, because creation is what makes things increase. So Jupiter is a planet for creation, including procreation. It's a planet that's very productive, including reproductive. And hence, Jupiter is very, very important for understanding parenting. Sometimes we think of Jupiter as the planet of children, but it's actually the planet of the people who make the children and the way that we raise the children. So it's a parent's planet. And because it's a planet of parenting, it is therefore a planet symbolizing all sorts of parental figures, the parental archetype. So it also includes non-blood parents, like your teachers. Teachers might mean your first grade teacher at some regular school, or it might mean your guru of some far out yoga or something. Any kind of teacher, coach, guide, guru, priest is a parent figure and therefore is represented by Jupiter. Now, also, since Jupiter is the planet of creativity and surplus, it has an attitude where it has already more than it needs. It doesn't have an attitude of scarcity. So Jupiter signifies the feeling of not having scarcity and therefore the ability, at least, to be generous. Jupiter signifies generosity. Now, another thing about positivity, besides it being the plus sign, also it implies a sense of optimism. So Jupiter certainly is the planet for optimism, and optimism means the belief, really. A positive belief is optimism. Belief that it's worth it. It will be worth it. It will come true. I can put my trust in this. It won't let me down. That's optimism. So because Jupiter is positivity, it's therefore optimism. And because it's optimism, it has to do with belief, trust, faith, like that. And because of that, it is connected with trustworthiness, faithfulness. So it's the planet for morals and values. And where this is all going, both of these strands of positivity is all pointing down to the bottom line of what Jupiter represents, which is wisdom. Parents give you wisdom. Morals are your wisdom. So a set of morals gets encapsulated into a kind of a wisdom which can be presented as a religion or a philosophy. Okay, now we know what we need to know about Jupiter to be able to interpret Jupiter in any sign. Now, today we want to talk about Jupiter in Gemini. So let's have a look at Gemini. Make sure we're clear about what Gemini signifies. The base or root of what Gemini is all about is intellect. Two very important functions of intellect are communication and invention. By invention, I mean the ability to solve a problem, the ability to create a means of achieving some kind of desired effect. Gemini, because its root symbolism is intellect, therefore Gemini is really a very inventive place in the zodiac and very communicative place in the zodiac. Because it's communication, what is communication? Communication is interaction. And interaction means two things will connect and exchange things. So Gemini is a lot about connecting things, bringing things together, bringing people together, and then letting them exchange. The other two things about interaction are, first of all, it means friendship, connectivity. If we're going to interact and connect, we're going to be exchanging things. That's basically what friendship means. So Gemini has a nature which is friendly, because friendship tends to connect things and allow them to interact. Since Gemini has this friendly nature to it, it's going to have a sense of wit and fun and recreation to it, which has a bit of a intellectual flavor. So that's why wit is a good word for Gemini. It's fun-loving or recreational and in kind of an intelligent way. So it would enjoy jokes, puns, words. Now also interaction means cooperation. Gemini likes cooperation. It's friendly and cooperative. And cooperation comes to mean diplomacy, negotiation, mediation, ability to compromise and cooperate. And the third thing about interaction is exchange, as we mentioned before. Exchange will not just mean the exchange of ideas. Communication is the exchange of ideas, but Gemini is all about all sorts of exchange. So it will also involve actually trading money. I give you something, you give me something back. So like trading products, trading money. So all the commercial and business type of things, commerce, that all comes under the umbrella of Gemini. Gemini is excellent with these things. Gemini, because it is very mediative, it's very middling, so it maintains a lot of balance and it keeps things very cleanly organized. And this is the third function of intellect, actually, is to organize things. So intellect does these three things. It communicates, it invents or solves, and it organizes. So there you have a good understanding of what Gemini is like. And you have a good understanding of what Jupiter is like. So now I think we're ready to talk about what Jupiter and Gemini means. How do you interpret Jupiter and Gemini? What you do is you look for something about Jupiter that has a lot to do with something about Gemini, or vice versa. And then you ask yourself, are these two things that have something to do with each other, are they getting along and cooperating, or are they fighting against each other, like two opposite opinions about the same thing? And then when you have two opposite opinions about the same thing, it produces clashes or difficult interpretations. And when you have two similar feelings about the same topic, it produces nice results. So for example, Jupiter is the planet of wisdom and Gemini is a sign of intellect. Here's an example of where they're talking about the same thing, intellect and wisdom. And they're both looking at it in the same direction. They're both looking at it in the same way. So it's a confluent or synergistic resonance between Jupiter and Gemini, that Jupiter is a planet for wisdom and Gemini is a sign for intellect. So what are we going to expect from this synergy between wisdom and intellect? We're going to expect wisdom or expertise or knowledge about the areas that Gemini pertains to. We'll leave it open like that because intellect is the root of what Gemini is all about. So to have a big synergy with the root of the sign, it's going to pertain to everything else that the sign signifies, because everything the sign signifies comes from the root of what it symbolizes. But let's give a little specificity. One of the important things that Gemini symbolizes is communication. So Jupiter and Gemini suggest wisdom or knowledge or expertise in communication. So what type of person do you expect when you hear that they have Jupiter and Gemini? Expect them to be a media person, a person who's able to convey information, a communicator or a conversationalist, able to speak, good with words, a writer, even a poet. Expect that from Jupiter in Gemini, especially if Jupiter in Gemini is prominent in their chart and not under distress from some other situations. Now, another thing about Gemini is that it's the sign of diplomacy. That goes along well with the wisdom also. So Jupiter in Gemini suggests knowledge or wisdom or expertise in diplomacy. So what you get are politicians and political advisors, people that know a lot about political science. You get diplomats and ambassadors, not always the frontline king, monarch, executive type of figure, because Gemini is a bit non-macho. But you can expect diplomats, ambassadors, people who are very intelligent in political science, and even frontline executive ambassadors who have more of that flavor to them. Another thing about Gemini, which is important here, is that Gemini is the sign of invention. So we expect people with Jupiter in Gemini to have expert inventiveness, or wisdom when it comes to inventing things or solving problems. So they may be literally inventors, or they should be avant-garde type of people that are thinking up new ways of doing things. Wisdom and intellect is also going to have an impact on wealth, because Gemini is the sign of commerce and Jupiter is the planet of surplus and profit. So when Jupiter is in Gemini, expect a person who is economically aware, probably business-minded, and also, because the exchange also has to do with organizing things and balancing things, then expect them also to not just be wealthy, but to be like an organized type and even a bit of a spiffy type, like kind of neat. Those are the main things about Jupiter and Gemini that all result from the synergy between Jupiter being the planet of wisdom and Gemini being the sign of intellect. There are two other things to also mention, which are side notes, really, on the Jupiter and Gemini scene. So one thing is Jupiter being the planet of giving and generosity. It goes along well with Gemini being such a friendly sign. So when you have one of the traits of a person with Jupiter and Gemini is that they're friendly and likable. Not intimidating, not off-putting. Of course, they may have other things in their chart that do indicate being intimidating, off-putting, etc. But just taking Jupiter and Gemini in a vacuum, the implication is here's a likable person, a friendly person. Now, one other thing about Jupiter and Gemini which is not harmonious. Jupiter is the planet of parenting, and Mercury is the sign of friendship. That's not exactly confluent, because parents act as authority figures and friends don't. Now, you will also find an echo of this in the fact that Jupiter can have to do with religion. It doesn't have to. It can be just as secular as any other planet and just be about philosophy and ethics. But it can also tend to have to do with religion and priests. Whereas Mercury, it could have to do with philosophy, but it mostly has to do with science and intellect. So it's a very similar problem which comes up with religion versus science that's actually coming up with, it's echoing from parents versus friends. Science is a friend-based thing. It's a peer-based thing. Everybody can do it. You don't have to be, there's no hierarchy involved. You just do the observations and the experiments, and then you review it with your peers. Whereas religion is a parent-based thing. It comes from God. It comes from a higher authority. It comes from priests and gurus, and they enforce it. So with Jupiter and Gemini, there is an issue that's not entirely pleasant. It's going to be this clash between the parent wanting to also be a friend, but the friend also wanting to be a parent, and so this gets in the way. So expect difficulty in authority roles such as parenting, where you tend to be more friendly and therefore you're not able to exert your authority when it's required, or vice versa. You're getting too authoritarian all of a sudden in a situation where you should be just acting like a friend. And in terms of how that affects the operation of the intellect in the philosophical and religious way, expect an interesting clash between religion and philosophy, or religion and science, where the Jupiter Gemini native is trying to see religious things in a scientific way, or trying to see scientific things in a religious way. Now, that is everything about Jupiter and Gemini. That's very important to know in a vacuum. In other words, without considering anything else about the person's chart. Now what I'd like to do is take a look at some real people that have Jupiter and Gemini. So here's a list of people that everybody knows that have Jupiter and Gemini. Let's start with the communicators, the people that really exemplify this synergy of wisdom and intellect and how it affects the ability to communicate. Oprah Winfrey, Barbara Walters, Martha Stewart, and then authors J.K. Rowling, Aldous Huxley, Charles Dickens, Lord Byron, Khalil Gibran, Erica Jong, Ron Howard, Jerry Seinfeld, John Malkovich, Michael Moore. There's even a certain flavor, which is difficult to describe, but there's a certain flavor to most or all of these people, isn't there? It's kind of spiffy or neat. Also, you have musicians, noteworthy musicians, both Simon and Garfunkel, and KRS-One. These people are really good with words. They're poetic. Next, let's look at some people that really exemplify the diplomacy that can result from Jupiter being in Gemini. Bernie Sanders. Now, he's also quite economically minded, right? Anyway, Bernie Sanders, Indira Gandhi, Theodore Roosevelt, Xi Jinping, Nikita Khrushchev. Now, let's look at a couple of names that ring the bell regarding what we said about inventiveness. Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Stephen Hawking. Not just invention there, but also that's a good illustration of the parenting-friendship clash and how it affects religion and science. And then also, just for the commerce thing, Michael Bloomberg is a great example of Jupiter and Gemini. I say a great example of Jupiter and Gemini because he's selling media about money. Right? He's selling financial information. That's at least how he made his fortune. So he's selling communication about exchange. You can't get more Jupiter and Gemini than that. Now, let me mention a few names that are not exactly spitting images of what we described for Jupiter and Gemini. So we have David Berkowitz. We have three very, very infamous serial killers. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, John Wayne Gacy, and Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. We also have Anton LaVey. And then we also have Amma. So they're a little bit different than the rest of this list. So what I would like to do for the remainder of the video is take one of the people from this list who really, really exemplifies Jupiter and Gemini and compare it with one of the people from the odd list. So let's take the first one from each. Luckily for us, they both have well-documented birth times. We'll take Oprah Winfrey and compare her with David Berkowitz. Compare the charts to see why is Oprah Winfrey so verbatim Jupiter and Gemini, whereas David Berkowitz is a friendly, likable person. So here's the archetypical Jupiter and Gemini Oprah Winfrey. What do you see about her chart? First of all, Jupiter in Gemini, Jupiter is her first lord. Second of all, her first house is Jupiter Vargotam. Now that means that it's Sagittarius, so it's Jupiter owned. And the Amsha, the Navamsha, the ninth division, which is very important, the ninth division of the zodiac sign, is also Sagittarius. So she's extremely Jupiter dominant, and above and beyond that, she has Jupiter opposite every planet in her chart. She has Jupiter in a position in Gemini where it strongly influences her ascendant and moon and sun and every other planet. So in her chart, Jupiter is fabulously dominant. That's why she comes across as a super great example for Jupiter in Gemini. That's why she's archetypically Jupiter in Gemini. Now, how about David Berkowitz? He is an atypical type because he's very unfriendly. He's a killer. So what is the dominant thing in his chart? Is it Jupiter in Gemini? Not really. It's tucked away in the 8th house. So what is really important in his chart? He has a very, very low dignity moon in Kamadruma Yoga and conjoined Rahu. And that is the most influential thing in his chart. So Oprah Winfrey has her Jupiter in Gemini as the most influential thing in her chart. David Berkowitz has a wrecked moon, conjoined Rahu, Kamadruma, and terrible dignity as the most important thing in his chart. His Jupiter in Gemini is some kind of a subtext to this awful moon. Furthermore, everything besides the moon and Rahu Ketu, everything else in his chart is in either the 6th, 8th, or 12th house. Those are the dustans, or the difficult houses. His Saturn is pretty dominant. Really, it's this moon Rahu thing which is dominating his chart, but runner-up is this Saturn. Saturn in the 12th house, exalted but retrograde, is having a huge dominance, especially on his Venus. As far as the Jupiter in Gemini, yeah, he was born with Jupiter in Gemini, but it's in the 8th house, combust by the sun, and not a big player at all. So I wanted to share this to illustrate two people can both have a planet in the same sign, but you don't expect them to have exactly the same effects. You should learn the theoretical effects of Jupiter and Gemini that we discussed. But then you should look at the chart to first of all just see how important is this Jupiter and Gemini in this person's chart. However important it is, you expect all the things that you just learned about Jupiter and Gemini to be obvious. However muted Jupiter and Gemini is, expect all the things about Jupiter and Gemini not to be so obvious in the person. And expect things that are obvious about the person to come from other sources. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that discussion of Jupiter and Gemini and kind of a detailed look at how it functions in these two charts. If you would like to see your chart and your planets and your signs and learn which planet is most dominant, least dominant, etc., for you, go to my website, victorcara.com, and order the guided tour of your birth chart. And that will give you all of that information. Thank you very much.